So this is the second video in terms of more of a kind of modal exploration idea when you're improvising. The first one I did was the constant scale exercise, and here it's the idea of kind of moving through scales in a fairly linear fashion up and down. This one is a kind of similar idea where you still need to know your modes pretty well, but here we're going to stay actually quite static. Now I'm using the term modal interchange in a very flexible manner. I've heard a couple of other jazz tutorials use this idea as well, and I like it. It kind of sounds right. It's not strictly exactly as the meaning of it, but the idea that we're using here is that we're going to try to stay in one area of the chord sequence, okay, and I'm going to try to use the minimal amount of movement using each scale. In other words, my first, again, I'm going to go through C minor 7, F7 flat 9 where I'm using a half whole diminished, B flat major 7 where I'm using the Ionian, E flat major 7 I'm using a Lydian, A minor 7 flat 5 I'm using the Locrian with, you can either call it the natural second or the raised second, but basically that instead of a flattened second in the Locrian mode, a D altered, G minor 7, I'm using a G Dorian, and here over the final one which I've just added, I'm going to use a G altered. So those are my actual scales. Now the first thing I want to be able to do obviously is to play each scale. And this is what I kind of call modal mapping. If I was actually modal mapping, sorry, let's slow down a bit. When I'm going through a piece of jazz, the first thing I might do is literally just play the chord and just play the mode above it. Then I'm moving on to the F7, and I hear I'm using this half whole diminished. Then I've got the B flat Ionian, and the E flat major. And these are things, by the way, you should be able to also sing. So I'm not going to sing because I'm not very good at it, but secretly I do sing. And you should actually know the sound of each of these modes by singing against the chord itself and then singing with the scale. Okay, A minor 7 flat 5. And again, I should be able to sing that and predict what note is coming next, because that means I've kind of internalized the mode and I'm not just playing it as a physical pattern on the instrument. There is a time and place for sort of digital physical patterns. It's very fun, but I should also be able to actually internalize the mode so I can sing it up and down. Obviously, I can also do things when I'm playing modes. You know, there's various ways of kind of breaking up the actual scale as well, and one of them is called step laddering, for example. And in fact, Mark Levine Jazz Theory book, there's a very good chapter called From Scales to Music, I think it's called, and that gives a number of different ways of sort of like moving around the scales. Anyway, to get back to it, A minor 7 flat 5. Then I've got the D altered. Now this one again, you know, if you play it and you don't really understand the sound of it, it's a very, you know, when you hear people sort of like just playing around with it, it's actually quite difficult to make it work if you don't really understand what's going on in terms of the sounds and their relation to the root note. So, you know, take your time, you know, to listen to each part of that scale. You can hear how that works, but if I just sort of play, you know, like randomly, it doesn't sound like much at all. So you do need to sort of slow down and kind of work through each of these modes as well. Then I've got a G Dorian. Now again, technically I should be using an Aeolian in terms of the actual sort of modal relationship that's going on with that G minor 7, but I've chosen a Dorian because I prefer the sound of it, and this is something that obviously as a jazz musician, it's up to you in it basically. In the end, you should know how to play the Aeolian correctly, but at a certain point you come to kind of like choose certain scales and things that you also like as well. And because it's resolving on this chord, I've got a right, if I want to play that Dorian mode, which I'm going to. And then I've got a G altered. So having played played each of those scales separately, I might even then just play each of them and improvise and see what it kind of sounds like if I play around with each of these scales. This is not, by the way, modal interchange yet. This is just to show you that kind of familiarity with each mode. If I move to the next one, so there, again, here I'm just now sort of like getting used to how it kind of feels under my fingers. So having sort of sung the scales and actually learnt them in sequence, I can then try playing around with them and seeing how they sound. And actually I find that that was a very useful part of my kind of understanding of jazz, is just to take a bit of time over each thing and actually see how they work. You can even do things like just playing like 2 bars of C minor 7, 2 bars of F7 flat 9 and actually get used to create exercises when you're learning a piece where you actually just home in on perhaps like 2 or 3 bars and the kind of relationship between them. Anyway, having done that, the modal interchange technique is this. What we're going to do is we're going to pick one area of the first mode, and in this instance, let's just keep it fairly simple. I'm going to just play from C to G. Okay? And what I'm going to do is, as I change each chord, I now need to adjust which notes need to change from scale to scale. So I've got the Doring here. Now, the F7 flat 9, only one note actually changes there in that relationship. Then when I go back to B flat major, I'm here. E flat major is going to be the same because it's coming out of exactly the same scale. It's just a 4 chord. Interestingly, when I come to the A minor 7 flat 5, it's going to be the same as well. This is coming out of a C melodic minor. But when I go to the D altered, I'm going to have to adjust a few notes. Not many though. Notice there I've just got to change one note. Okay. Then I'm onto the G Doring. And then here, now what you'll notice is I'm trying to stay, my thumb in this instance, or whatever instrument you're playing, your lowest note is trying to stay the same if it can. If you have to move it, then move it either a semitone up or a semitone down. So in other words, I'll go back to that A minor 7 flat 5, then the D altered, okay, G Dorian, but here I'm going to have to come, I could either go up or down. I'm going to go down to a B. I get that sound, okay? So we've got that, this overall. Do exactly the same exercise then starting on F. So if I start on the 4th of C Dorian, I'm going to have that. Now, what's interesting about this exercise is, again, sometimes with jazz, you end up sort of like playing across, you know, like these scales and moving through octaves like rapidly. What I think is really interesting is to come down into just sort of trying to almost stay in the same place. So this one teaches us the kind of like the interrelationship of how the notes are changing and which common tones remain. So for example, if I do this exercise starting on the F, I get this, then the next one I'm going to get is this. So I can see already that I've got this, then it will go back to this here. And if I've done that exercise, there, it's going to change on the next one. Then a lot, radically, on the altered. I've got a lot of this kind of white note to black notes. And and then again it's going to change a lot here. But you'll notice I was able to stay on the F the whole time because it's a common tone between all of them. So again, this is a very good exercise if it works really well for standards, but it's a very good way of, again, navigating through trickier, more modern kind of compositions. You know, Wayne Shorter always use a good example of Mingus tunes, you know, some of the Miles Davis tunes that he wrote, even something like Giant Steps is a really good way because you could do a modal interchange going through the Giant Step sequence. You can also do the constant scale exercise. And this is something that I don't see a vast amount of in YouTube videos, those particular approaches. There's a lot of things about using cells and various things like that, but actually modal interchange and constant scale is another way of navigating through these kind of like these quite disparate chord sequences. Okay, so that's that for this particular exercise, and the final one I'm going to look at, I'm just going to call common tones, which should be fairly obvious what we're about to cover. Thank you.